After last Friday's summit between the American and Russian presidents seemed to move Donald Trump away from the idea of a ceasefire, European leaders were at the White House on Monday in a show of force to support Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelensky's sit-down with Trump was far more cordial than his first, with both men nearly eye to eye on wanting to find a solution.
The outcome, I think, is on the one hand, first of all, positive. You know, we have seen that Europe speaks with a united voice. We have seen that Trump is taking that into consideration, and we have seen that Zelensky's, let's say, demands were at least regarded also as appropriate.
I think in his eyes, Trump is playing a role of the mediator. So certainly he does not see himself as aligning with either side. However, I would say that it's easy, it's not very hard to kind of sway Donald Trump and to manipulate his position. He clearly does not have a very deep understanding of history of relations between Russia and Ukraine, of history of promises that were broken by Russia, or maybe he doesn't really care about that much. He sees the situation in kind of a very black and white manner. So he sees a big country, a much bigger country with a bigger army, with vaster resources, a nuclear armed country that dominated also its neighbor for many years and centuries.
What is also very important is there will be follow-up talks, or at least that is the plan at the moment, and I think talking about peace is always better than making war. What is, of course, really a problem at this stage is we have no ceasefire. So that means Trump, in a way, succeeded in muddling through this, in a way pointing it away, saying, you know, he understands Putin, that he does not want it. So I think this is the critical issue, because, of course, when one party takes it as a precondition to have a ceasefire and the other one doesn't want it, there will be problems for further talks.
In the past, Putin has been really reluctant to have any meetings with Volodymyr Zelenskyy because he does not see him as a legitimate leader, as a legitimate president. He does not see Ukraine as, you know, a country, a separate, sovereign and independent state and a legitimate entity. And the fact that President Trump now kind of wants to skip that stage of a ceasefire, despite his previous statements, you know, that he wants a ceasefire in Ukraine, despite the previous ultimatums he issued to Russia, that Russia must agree to a ceasefire, I think is a kind of dangerous step, because it indicates that he is more inclined to just take Russia's words at face value, to trust President Putin and his words.
Any Russia's claims, verbal, promises of certain guarantees at this point are completely unreliable, given that the Kremlin has repeatedly violated them in the past, and Ukraine is completely right to be very skeptical about any such promises. The Kremlin has a little bit of leeway still, right? As we speak, they keep pushing further into Ukraine, occupying very slowly, but nonetheless consistently, small villages, additional square miles on the ground in Ukraine. And economically, they're not great. They're potentially facing imminent recession, but nonetheless, this is also not a catastrophic situation for them. So that realization, that's very clear for everybody involved, sort of raises some, I think, justified skepticism as to how legitimate, how honest the Kremlin is really in these promises, given that potentially the real goal may be just to procrastinate this conversation, offering vague promises. Notice how President Trump has shifted from his original impetus on immediate ceasefire to now claiming that we need to negotiate a long-term peace agreement. This is actually something that Putin was promising from the start, and this is certainly concerning for everyone involved on the Ukrainian side, given that this potentially is what the Kremlin is trying to achieve, try to prolongate these talks. There's no point in a ceasefire. Let's talk about this major peace deal. In the meantime, Putin is gaining time to allow him to keep pushing on the ground in Ukraine, and hope in the expectation that Ukrainian frontline will eventually collapse.
Putin has not agreed to anything, and we will see in the next couple of days what he thinks he will do, but I think it's important now to be right on track. There's one language that he understands, and that is pressure, and that is, I don't know, a combination of military and economic pressure. So that means, in a way, it's key that the Americans are in. It is key that secondary sanctions stay on the agenda, and it is then also key that, of course, the Europeans help to implement an agreement.
Ukraine might agree to some concessions and to make some compromises, but it needs to be sure that there will be very strong, robust security guarantees in place to prevent Russia from launching another aggression, from launching another invasion in some time in the future.
Значить, друзі, зараз всі бігли в школу.